Hi folks, it's good to be back. It's good for the season to be back. I am ready, more than ready beyond belief, to kickstart the season again. I'm so ready. Let's just crack on. Kicking things off for the Super League season, we have Hull FC at home versus Hull Kingston Rovers. Starting with how things kind of finished off last season with the league standings, FC finished in 10th, Hull KR finished in 4th. In terms of form, Hull FC finished the season with 0 wins in the last 5 games. Hull KR finished with 4 wins in the last 5 games. Very impressive back into the season there. In terms of changes that have been made to the squads, let's kick things off with Hull FC. So in terms of the players that came out, there's a few fairly big names in there. Chris Satai, Jake Clifford is going to be a big miss for them. Scott Taylor, Jamie Shaw, Adam Swift, Andre Savelio, Brad Dwyer, Joe Lovadua, I know people are a bit 50-50 on him. Ben McNamara, probably the biggest names there. But in terms of the players that came in, there's a few decent names and one in particular, but let's go through them now. They brought in Herman Sasa, Jaden Ockenbaugh. Other standouts include Morgan Smith, I guess, is Super League standard, and Farmanu Brown is the one that really sticks out for me. And I'm genuinely excited to see him in Super League. He played for New Zealand during the Pacific Championships a couple months ago, and is quite an exciting player. And this is a really, really strong signing for Hull FC. So I'm excited to see what he can do. But let's take a look at the changes that Hull Kingston Rovers have made. They've lost a few big players as well, which is unfortunate on their side. But starting with the players that they have lost. They have lost Sean Kenny Dowell due to retirement. You know, some of these aren't just transfers. Brad Schneider is going to be a massive miss. Rowan Milnes was a decent player. Reece Kennedy, Lewis Johnson had his moments. Kane Lynette and Jordan Abdul, who's on a season-long loan at Catalans Dragons. In terms of players that they brought in, however, it includes Oliver Gildart, Petter Hiku, Tyrone May, Niall Evalds, Jay Whitbread, Kalepi Tanganoa and Joe Burgess. So they lost some really key players but brought in some pretty decent players at the same time. Now, there's been a couple times where these two have played on opening day, or at least the opening weekend, and it's always been a pretty spicy game. I'm leaning towards Hull Kingston Rovers at the moment. I do think that on paper, both of these teams, and I know I yapped on about on paper a lot last season, but on paper, I think both of these teams look really, really strong. I just think spine-wise, even though they've lost Schneider and they've lost Abdul for this season, the spine is still stronger for me, and the individual quality, plus, do I want to say coach? I don't know. I just think overall Hull KR are just a tad better. I still know Tony Smith as a coach is top class, especially in Super League. Could get Hull FC firing this season, but we'll have to see. I do think it's going to be a somewhat close game, but to give a prediction for this one, I'm going to go with Hull FC 22, Hull Kingston Rovers 28. Moving on to Leeds Rhinos at home versus Salford Red Devils. Starting with league position from last season, Leeds finished in 8th, Salford finished in 7th. In terms of form from their last 5 games, last season they both won 2 out of those 5. Now looking at transfers, and there are some pretty decent ones here, especially on the side of Leeds that a lot of you will know about already, but we'll talk about players out first of all. The key names include Aidan Caesar, Zane Tetavano, Blake Austin, Nenny McDonald, and probably Richie Myler. The rest, probably not as important. Looking at the players in, though, which ain't too bad for Leeds Rhinos. Mikhail Gudamon, Lockie Miller, who's a big inclusion. Matt Frawley is also decent. Paul Momorowski is decent. Brodie Croft is massive. So, multiple NRL talents in there, and a huge inclusion in Brodie Croft. Also, Andy Ackers on top of that. Nearly forgot about him. So the spine for Leeds is looking... It is looking good right now. I'm not even a Leeds Rhinos fan, but it is looking good. With Miller, with Frawley, Croft, and Ackers, it is strong. It is very, very strong. But looking at the side of Salford Red Devils, in terms of players that came out, the key names would be, I believe, of course, Brodie Croft and Andy Ackers. Ken Seo, unfortunately, he's going to be a big miss, and Joe Burgess. So they're like the biggest names. In terms of players that came in, Nenny McDonald from Leeds, Ethan Ryan, Cade Cust as well, of course, Joe Shorrocks, and Joe Meller. So there's some really solid inclusion. So, you know, some decent names that went out. But in terms of replacements, not too bad coming in. But to compare these squads, I think there have been some key changes. One is getting a new spine because they've stolen from someone else's. So they're both going to be learning some things. I think the inclusion of Cade Cust is not a bad replacement. It's not a like for like with Brodie Croft at all, but it's not a bad replacement by any means. I think if he's at any Super League team, I think any one of those would be happy to have him, because I think he's fine. Nothing that's going to set the league on fire, but he's nothing terrible. He's well above average, let's just put it that way, instead of yapping on. But to come towards a prediction, I do think it leans heavily towards Leeds. Given the players that Salford lost and the key players they lost, which was Leeds' gain, I'm leaning heavily towards Leeds with a fairly comfortable win here. I'm pretty sure that Mark Sneyd, I didn't even mention him, plus Ryan Brierley, still going to be very reliable, competent players who are going to definitely keep this team going, keep them on the straight and narrow. There's absolutely going to be a penalty kick in there somewhere from Mark Sneyd. You can count on it. So in terms of a prediction, I'm going to go with Leeds Rhinos 30, Salford Red Devils 14. Next up, we have the Leigh Leopards at home versus Huddersfield Giants. Starting with league position from the end of last season, Leigh Leopards finished in 5th, Huddersfield Giants finished in 9th. In terms of form from their last 5 games last season, they both won 2 in those 5. Let's take a look at transfers, starting with the Leigh Leopards. Some interesting ones here. So in terms of players that went out, it includes Oliver Gildart, Joe Wardle, Ben Reynolds, and Joe Mello were the biggest names from that one. There is someone with a longer name, but I don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm not going to even try. In terms of players that came in, key players would include, I suppose, Owen Trout for one, Ben McNamara, and then the biggest one, who is a massive signing. I had no idea that this was going to happen, heard nothing about it, but Matt Moylan is, for me, is so unexpected. For anyone that watched the NRL, saw how strong the Cronulla Sharks were, and I think Matt Moylan was a scapegoat for a lot of the bad performances. He is an incredible player. You know, sometimes in Super League we get a few like stars that come over, like top stars that come over and really showcase exactly why they, you know, were stars in the NRL in the first place. I wouldn't necessarily say Matt Moylan is like a star right at the top. Not by any means, but this is a big signing. Like, this is a big signing. But we'll take a look at Huddersfield before we get into a bit more of a comparison. So in terms of players out for Huddersfield, big names included Theo Farge, that's a massive one. Will Price is another massive loss. Jermaine McGilvery, Chris McQueen, Nathan Peets, Owen Trout as well, and Innes Senior. They're some of the biggest names. In terms of replacements, Thomas Deacon from the Sydney Roosters. Adam Swift is a big signing from Hull. Andre Cervello is another one. And Adam Clune from the Newcastle Knights. So there's a few decent replacements in there. They've lost a lot of big players with some replacements. But in terms of comparing these two teams together, Leigh have an unbelievable spine. They had a really solid one last season, and the inclusion of Matt Moylan in this blows that out of the water. Most likely going to have Gareth O'Brien at fullback. Maybe they'll have Zach Cardacre there from time to time. We'll kind of see how things go in terms of injuries. But Matt Moylan and Lachlan Lamb at 6 and 7 is going to be, in my opinion, dangerous beyond belief. Trying to think of a word, but dangerous beyond belief. These two could cause absolute havoc week in, week out. So I hope they're both fit. I don't want to have to play against them. I mean, it's not me that's playing, but my team. They could be insane. Absolutely insane. Plus Edwin Apape on top of that. It don't look bad for Leigh. It don't look too bad for Leigh. Huddersfield, they have their moments. We all know what Huddersfield's like. It's kind of, they always have some decent players in there. They always have some moments, but it's never sustained long enough. And I don't think they're a team that ever really deals with injuries too much from my recollection. They never really deal with too many. but I just don't think they've got the squad to do much this season, unfortunately. I think Adam Clune is a massive inclusion. But compared to Leigh, I think it's going to be a pretty comfortable one. Not to say that Huddersfield can't put up points, because sometimes they find a way to make it happen. But I'm going to go with Leigh Leopards 34, Huddersfield Giants 16. Next up, we have St Helens at home versus London Broncos. Starting with league position, St Helens finished in 3rd place last season, and in terms of their last 5 games, won 4 in the last 5. I'm not going to include the positional form from London because it's not really relevant right now. Of course, next week, when we know the standings and everything like that, I'll start talking about this season. Now, this one could get ugly. But let's just go over the transfers first. We'll start with St Helens. So there's a couple big names here that they're missing out on. So James Roby is retired. Louis McCarthy-Scarsbrook also retired. A couple names as well. Will Hapouate, not a massive loss, but, still played pretty regularly. So, and the rest of them, nothing to really worry too much about. There are a lot of players that have come out. So depth may be a slight question mark, but I don't think many of these got much game time. So they're not to be worried about too much. But in terms of players that came in, it ain't been a bad window for Saints. Darrell Clark, for one. Arguably the best hooker in the league. When everyone's at their best, I think Darrell Clark is the best in the league. T. Ritson is rapid. We didn't see him feature, from what I recall, too much. I know Benison got a lot of game time as well as Makinson on the wings. But that loan was now made permanent to St Helens for T. Ritson. Really quick player. If he's going to develop, we need to see that soon, because Makinson hasn't got too many years left, I guess. So he's going to be out the door at some point, and Ritson's going to come in. Matt Whitley, solid. And Wanga Blake from the Parramatta Eels is another one of those, a bit like Matt Moylan, was unexpected for me. I saw this coming from absolutely nowhere. So in terms of the players out, Roby is a massive loss. But there should be no reason for Saints fans to doubt the quality that Darrell Clark has. I understand how much you could love a player like that. So many other clubs have long-standing players that have had testimonials that they absolutely adore. And then when they've gone, it's maybe just not been the same. But in terms of a replacement, I don't think, unless you looked at the NRL, you couldn't have done any better than Darrell Clark. Simple as that. Wanga Blake is a massive inclusion in the centres, and T. Ritson on the wing hopefully continues to develop as a really young player into somebody that could be great. So, moving on to the Broncos, I unfortunately didn't pay attention to the Championship. That's not really my bag. That's not my thing. So, there are certain players that I just won't know about here. But in terms of players out, Paul Oldberg, Wellington Albert, of course I know who he is. Corey Norman is another one. There aren't really many names that I recognise in there. There's just a few of them that I know about. In terms of players in, I couldn't tell you some of these. Reece Kennedy, I can tell you about. It's a solid inclusion. Lee Kershaw is probably the only other one that I recognise there. A lot of them are Championship players, or League One players, which I just don't know about. But in terms of the overall depth between these two teams, there is a major gulf. And we all know what's going to happen with London, and we kind of know the situation that they're in. And I don't feel sorry for them. I don't think they want me feeling sorry for them, or anyone for that matter. But it's just a real unfortunate situation that they're in. In terms of this game, I'm going to back London, as horrible as it sounds having to say it out loud. I back London to get points on the board, but really not many. Honestly, not many. I will back them to get a try, but St Helens, they're favoured by 29.5 points on Bet365. I have no issues taking that handicap on St Helens. Absolutely no issues, because my gap is even bigger than that. My what is even bigger than that? My prediction is even bigger than that. So I'm going to go very simply, rather than yapping on again, I'm going to go with St Helens 54, London Broncos 6. Next up, we have Castleford Tigers at home versus Wigan Warriors. Starting with league position from last season, Castleford finished in 11th, Wigan Warriors finished in 1st place. In terms of form from their last 5 last season, Castleford only won 1 in their last 5, Wigan won 5 of their last 5. Now, looking at the changes first, starting with Castleford Tigers. Players out, there's a few big names here. So Niall Evalds is a massive one. Jordan Turner is a big loss to Oldham. Nathan Massey, Greg Eden, Jacob Hookham. Who else we got there as well? Billy Sirikas, Blake Austin. Who else? Maybe Gareth Widdop as well. So there's a few really big names in there. They weren't always great performers because Castleford obviously weren't a great team last season. But in terms of names and what they can offer, Niall Evalds is a big loss for them. And just by name, Gareth Widdop's a big loss as well. But performance-wise, don't think he did too much that was special. In terms of players that they brought in, though, Nixon Putt, I think, is a very reliable Papua New Guinea international. Eli Elzakem was a Lebanon international. He was one of those that was quite underrated in that tournament. Like, Adam Dwayhe and Mitchell Moses were 2 standouts, and then you had, I can't remember, I think it was Rajab. Khalid Rajab was another standout, but Elzakem was one that kept popping up. So I think that's a really solid inclusion. Who else we got here? Rowan Mills would be solid. Innis Senior as well. Sami Kabula, he's a big guy. He is a massive guy. I think he's at least 6'4". He looks like a tank. In terms of work rate, I don't know if he's going to be like great. In terms of minutes, I don't think you'll get too many out of him. But hopefully, based on his size, he could be a real weapon for Castleford going forward. So, taking a look at the ins and outs for Wigan, let's start with the players out first. There's a lot of them, and a lot of key ones as well. So Kai Pearce-Paul has gone to the Newcastle Knights. Toby King has returned to Warrington Wolves. Who else we got here? We have Cade Cust is no longer there. Ian Thornley, Morgan Smithies, Sam Powell, Joe Shorrocks, and a few sort of smaller names in there as well. So in terms of players out, there's a lot. Players in, though, ain't too bad. So it's a little bit similar to St. Helens. They have a lot of players coming out, some key ones, a lot of smaller players, but the players they brought in are really strong, which includes Cruz Leeming, who is a top hooker, Adam Kieran, who was extremely reliable and effective for Catalans last season, Taiki Chan as well was solid. I believe he had a decent number of games. I'm sure he did. And then, of course, Luke Thompson is a massive inclusion to this forward pack for Wigan. We know that they produce decent forwards year on year. I can't remember. I think it's Nsemba is one that they're starting to bring through. I hope I got that one right. But they always seem to have a strong forward pack. And it doesn't look particularly worse this season. In fact, it's just as good, if not better. So, for Wigan to have brought in the players that they did, especially after losing the players that they did, I don't have any issues with them being effective again this season. Compared to Castleford, yes, they lost some key names, but replacements have been pretty solid, I feel. Hopefully, Castleford can be a much more effective team because they have been lacking severely the last few years, but we'll see what they're able to produce. But in terms of this game, Castleford can put points on the board, but I don't think it'll be too many. I think Wigan can absolutely run away with this one. There's always the chance it's a close-scoring game. 1, if Castleford are somehow a lot better than they were last season. And 2, there's a bit of rust on the side of Wigan with the change that they made in the spine in particular. Yes, I think it's Bevan French that just moves from the wing into the number 6 because he did play there a lot when Cade Cust was injured. Sam Powell is going to be a miss, not a huge miss, because I think the rest of the players in the spine are a lot more important in Smith, French, and Field. But you never know. You never know how important a player is until they're gone. So, I guess we will see. But in terms of a prediction, I feel pretty comfortable with a win towards Wigan. So I'm going to go with Castleford Tigers 10, Wigan Warriors 40. Finally, we have the Catalans Dragons at home versus Warrington Wolves. Starting with league position, at the end of last season, Catalans finished in 2nd on the ladder, Warrington finished in 6th. In terms of form from their last 5, Catalans won 4 of them, and Warrington only won 2 of them. Taking a look at players out and in, starting with Catalans Dragons. Outs include Sam Tompkins, who's a massive leader, they're going to miss him. Adam Kieran is another one as well. I spoke about Taiki Chan. Mikael Gudamon is no longer there. Tyrone May is also one that's no longer there. Mitchell Pearce is retired, and Matt Whitley. So, a real handful of solid leaders, solid performers that are now no longer there. But if you look at the players they've brought in, really, really strong window from them. So it includes Chris Satai, who is a powerful forward. Theo Farge, I think, is one of the most underrated halfbacks in the league. I think can be a leader. Tariq Sims is a huge inclusion from Melbourne Storm. Jaden Nikarima, another one from the Storm. Solid back rower. I think he's a second rower, if I remember correctly. Bailey Siranen, solid as well from the New Zealand Warriors. And Jordan Abdul, who's a pretty decent inclusion. Like, that was a little bit unexpected for me when that was announced. But, you know, you need to replace Mitchell Pearce and Tyrone May. And I think you bring in Jordan Abdul, who's a solid player. He's got a really strong kicking game. I think was really unfortunate with his injury last season. And I think he was underrated a little bit before that. I think he was getting a lot of stick from fans. Of course, Hull KR fans will know a lot more than me on his performances, but I don't think he did anything terrible. But it was, of course, good for them that Mikey Lewis stepped up, but enough on them. The replacements that they've made, like Chris Satai in for Gudamon, for example, is massive. May and Pearce out for Abdul and Farge is massive as well. You know, losing out on Sam Tompkins is big, but in terms of like leadership, like there's no other fullbacks that they brought in, but leadership-wise, Sims, Nikarima, and Siranen are huge. So I think that Catalans Dragons team may experience some issues with, you know, connections in the spine, may have some issues, but in terms of overall quality, I think it's maybe just got a tad better. But we're going to take a look at the Warrington Wolves now. We're going to start with the players that they have lost. So that includes Darryl Clark. Pain. Peter Mataltia is not a huge miss. Neither is Greg Minikin. Thomas McKaylee is a fairly big miss. That forward pack was so much more effective, so much stronger when he was available. And Riley Dean, nothing crazy. They haven't really missed him. I actually really hope it goes well for him in Australia, by the way. And Sam Cassiano, who is a massive player, but just wasn't it. It just wasn't it. But looking at players that came in, oh my. Lachlan Fitzgibbon from the Newcastle Knights. Roderick Tai, a fairly reliable player for Papua New Guinea. Toby King returns from his loan spell at Wigan. Geordie Crowther is signed permanently. He was on loan last season, put in some really solid performances at loose forward. Zane Musgrove from the St. George Illawarra Dragons. Brad Dwyer and Sam Powell. So you look at those replacements, you know, Dwyer and Powell aren't as good as Clark, but to bring in two fairly solid hookers to replace at least minimum top three hookers in Super League, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. You know, you miss out on Sam Cassiano and Thomas McKaylee. You bring in other forwards like Lachlan Fitzgibbon. I know he's not a prop, but you have Geordie Crowther on a permanent, and then you also have Zane Musgrove, who is, I think, is a decent addition. I don't think he's going to be anything crazy or anything too special, but I think he'll at least be solid. So in terms of the losses for Warrington, they're not the worst thing in the world. Clark is a massive miss, but overall it's not the end of the world, especially with the players that they brought in. Now, comparing these two teams for this last game of round one, Ben McNamara, Steve McNamara is his name, not Ben. I'm thinking of the player. Steve McNamara, I think, is a really underrated coach. And defensively, this Catalans team is consistent pretty much year in, year out. They've maybe had a few dips here and there, but the last few years, I recall them just being a really solid defensive team. Warrington in attack is a big question mark for me. The only thing that I have for Warrington over Catalans, as I mentioned before, is the changes in the spine for Catalans. New things to get used to. Yes, there'll be some new attacking processes, but Martin Gleeson was the one that took over the attacking responsibility towards the back end of last season for Warrington. I'm assuming he'll also be the one, like the main voice on the attacking side, so there's at least a little bit of consistency in the processes that they have this season, and the spine is almost the exact same. Given that Darryl Clark was essentially moved to one side, he picked up an injury, moved to one side, and Danny Walker took over that starting position at hooker, I don't think there'll be too much different in that spine. and hopefully there's a big step up from Josh Drinkwater. He's going to be the biggest question mark for me for Warrington this season. But in terms of the forward packs, I think Warrington are edging it. In terms of the spine, Warrington's a little bit more consistent with theirs and the attacking coach. In terms of outside players, Catalans do have some weapons in Johnston and Davies. I believe Davies is still there. Or Davis, whichever one it is. I do apologise. This is the toughest game for me. Next one after that's probably the Hull derby, but this is probably my bias coming out, and I do acknowledge that. And if you are to bet, I would, without bias, fully recommend that you just do not touch this game. Go nowhere near it. Maybe pick a try scorer, just one try scorer if it lets you do that, but do not touch this game. That is my best advice. But I think the fitness levels are going to lean in favour of Warrington. I just think we know what Sam Burgess was like as a player. There is no way he's going to let any team, doesn't matter if it's Warrington, if he went somewhere else, like Salford, Leigh, doesn't matter. He's not going to let his team be unfit, close to unfit, or get outworked by another team. It ain't going to happen. So I'm fully confident that Warrington's fitness is going to help them get through this. They will have some problems here and there. It's going to be a close game because it usually is, especially when it's at home for Catalans. But I'm just going to edge it towards Warrington. So I'm going to take Catalans Dragons 16, Warrington Wolves 20. So to close out this video, just want to talk about bets real quick. Now, I do have a TikTok account. The name is Kinetic Rugby League, or at KineticRL, if you want to search the username. Now, the point is, for the TikTok account, that there will be some content on there, but for bets specifically, I'll be posting the exact bets that I'm going with for that weekend. Sometimes it may include NRL games as well, like they may be merged together when their season starts. But the point is that if you want to see the bets I'm placing, I'll give a few points on TikTok for why I've gone with those. But then if you want a bit more in-depth analysis, stats, things like that, you come here. And then that kind of breaks it down for you. And you can click the timestamp, skip to whichever game you want to. You'll find reasons why I'd avoid putting a bet on. For example, Catalans and Warrington, just avoid that outright is my first comment. But yeah, so go to TikTok if you want to see specifically what bet I'll be placing this weekend. But that is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I'm so glad to be back. Cannot wait for the season to get started. And yeah, I hope you all had a great Christmas. Welcome back. And yeah, I'll see you on TikTok, or I will see you next time.